If you look at the data in the literature, and specifically as reported, there's annual reports in the state of Oregon where the practice of assisted suicide has now been legal for about 13 years. And when you look at that data, it helps us get our minds around some of the reasons people are seeking this out and backing it. And when I started looking at that, I always thought, well, the number one reason you would think would be suffering and problems of suffering, in pain and issues like that. But actually, the number one reason that keeps coming up year after year in Oregon is a fear of losing autonomy. And closely related to that, and number three on the list, is also a fear of losing dignity. Now, when we turn to the works of St. Thomas Aquinas and Thomists in moral theology, such as, the friar, Father Serve Pinckaers, who taught for many, many years at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, and made a great distinction between what he called freedom of indifference and freedom for excellence. Pinckaers gives us an understanding of freedom much richer than what often happens here in our country, which is sometimes looking and just simply not really giving it a whole lot of thought and thinking, well, I'm free insofar as I can choose to do what I want. Insofar as I'm kind of my own overseer. And when I operate this way, I can think of my own freedom as pitted maybe against your freedom or somebody else's. So to the degree that I'm left to do what I want to do, so long as it, as far as we can tell, doesn't hurt anybody else, I should be free to do it. I think that's, truth be known, a fairly common understanding of freedom in the United States. Now, Pinckaers would explain that this is freedom of indifference. You can kind of choose between opposites. And if you reduce freedom to that, then it's going to be really hard to understand that the church's absolute no to something like doctor-prescribed suicide, also known as assisted suicide, coined in different ways depending which source you're reading, but basically a suicidal act taken with the help of a prescription by a cooperating doctor, okay? Well, if that's your understanding of freedom, you're not going to understand that the church's absolute no to such practices is actually a deeper yes, in order to promote and safeguard human freedom. But so on the one hand, you have what some would call autonomy and what I kind of think could rightly be coined, as Pinckaers coins it, a freedom of indifference. You sort of determine for yourself what's good and bad. It's very self-referential. And if you follow it through logically, I can even then see my own freedom pitted against God's and the church's statements. And I can start to erroneously see the church, things like natural law, divine law, as impositions against my own freedom. And I can see the church's no then as a problematic thing relative to my freedom. Well, there's this other kind of freedom spoken about by Pinckaers. He calls it freedom for excellence. In work I've done, I call it freedom to flourish. It's a freedom to do something. And at the moral level, it's a freedom to flourish in full accord with my God-given human nature, in cooperation with God's grace, in hope of eternal life. So in my work, I like to contrast cases based in that distinction. On the one hand, case where somebody might be arguing and even committing suicide on those grounds of autonomy, whereas if you look at freedom to flourish, grounded in human nature, flourishing in accord with God's plan for my life, we see that there's much more to the question than just, more or less reasonable choice-making capacity. Another distinction is important regarding human dignity. The idea of life without dignity is completely untenable. Nobody would want to live a life devoid of all dignity. Of course not. And so some argue on grounds of dignity that people should be able to take their own life on their own terms. But there is a distinction drawn in the literature. And one thinker that comes to mind immediately is Franciscan friar, medical doctor Daniel Solmesi, who's on faculty at University of Chicago's medical school. And he's done work on the whole concept of vulnerability and dignity. And he draws, as do others, a distinction between attributed and intrinsic dignity. Attributed dignity is basically that dignity that is gained and is lost. But intrinsic dignity is grounded ultimately in God's unwaverable love for us. So from the moment of my coming into existence through the moment of my natural death, I always have this intrinsic dignity. So it's helpful to look and say, well, is there such a thing as death devoid of all dignity? No, there is not. And when we get to that point, that has implications for patient care. That has implications for how we are to be present for our loved ones, for our patients, as they're sometimes going through very terrible ravages of illnesses for which they need a lot of help. They need good pain control, good support, good family support. And when you look at something like this fuller understanding of human freedom on the one hand, and this through that distinction between autonomy and freedom to flourish, or this other distinction between intrinsic and attributed dignity, you see that actually within the Catholic Church, there's more to the story. It's more nuanced than what you hear currently bantered about today in some of the literature. Simple all or nothing statements, which don't take these distinctions seriously. But in Catholic thought, we do. And through these distinctions, what we see, when we think them through carefully, is that the Catholic Church, in her absolute no, the no to assisted suicide and voluntary euthanasia within Catholic moral thought and Catholic teaching, is never an acceptable option, no matter what the terrible circumstance is. Why? Because of promoting that person's flourishing, even through their natural death, and in full accord with their dignity. So that it's a deeper yes, that knows a deeper yes to fully supporting, standing with, compassionately, lovingly, and intelligently providing care for those who are going through a terrible illness. And when we do that, we actually see that there is no contradiction here between God's will, the Church's norms, as more or less explicating that. Rather than being opposed to my freedom, it actually safeguards and promotes my freedom. It actually safeguards and promotes my dignity. When we understand that, we rightly realize that the Church's no is really a very profound yes.